All right, so let's get going on. Let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to be doing today is we are now at the point where we've covered what needs to go in each of the major sections of your research paper. We've covered how to put that research paper all together, including your title page, your abstract, and all those other things. So you should be now working on, finalizing, getting all your drafts together, things like that. Do the peer reviews for your fellow students for their results and discussion sections so they can get those back. But basically, we're getting to the end game in terms of our projects here. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of switch gears to the point where we now can imagine that we have our projects completed because we're so near to completion. And now it's time to think about how to present that to the world. So today we're going to start getting everybody ready for their oral presentation. And very pleased to see a lot of abstracts went into the URC. So last I checked, there was 12 of our students going to be presenting there. So that is awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make sure that everybody's ready in order to present for your conference talk. So this is all going to be about the conference talk presentation. A lot of what we're going to say here is going to double for your poster session. Basically, this is just ways and strategies, best practices for presenting your results. So just a real quick heads up. So for all of you that have gotten it into the URC, thanks for doing that. It really helps the committee when we kind of get a grasp on how many students are going to be presenting. So far, we have over 50 abstracts that have been submitted. But I do want to let you know that I double checked with the chair of the committee, and you can still submit your work. You can still submit an abstract. So if you missed that deadline, if you missed that Friday deadline there is still time to get your abstract in. And they would still like you to use this portal here. So once again, use the link, go to the 2019 IU South Bend Undergraduate Research Conference. There's still time. So if you didn't happen to get it in on time, if you had to just run one more results analysis or you're waiting on, one whatever, you still got time to submit your work. So I would like to see as many of us, hopefully all of us, make it down to the URC. So if for the 12 that submitted it, your guys are in. I checked today. For anybody else that almost made it there, you still got time. Please submit as soon as you can. Definitely try to get it in by Thursday. So that will be sort of like the end all day. The sooner the better, but definitely try to get it in by Thursday. All right, and again, just kind of keep focused on that goal. This is going to be your first chance to stand proudly in front of the work that you've done, show it to the world, and actually get it out there so that people might be able to benefit from the hard work that you've done, and you can make your contribution to psychology. So today is what we're going to be getting ready for the conference talk presentation and how to. And actually, just one last thing that I just want to remind everyone of before we get into this. So you remember, or hopefully you'll remember, on the syllabus, we have right before the URC. So we got the URC here on the 12th. Right before the URC, we got two classes. These are going to be the dry runs, optional or not optional, unable to present at the URC. So if for whatever reason you cannot present at the URC, you still need to do an oral presentation for this class. It's one of the requirements of the class. If you're doing it at the URC, I'm going to count that as your presentation. You don't have to do another one. If for whatever reason you can't present at the URC, you will have your opportunity to complete your required presentation either on April 9th or April 11th. So we will meet here in class for anybody that cannot present at the URC. That's going to be the days where you can do it. So if you can't present at the URC, just drop me a message. Let me know I'd like to present on the 9th. Let me know I'd like to present on the 11th, and we'll make sure that we schedule that in. Also, for those of you that might want to do a practice run, in front of other individuals, kind of mimic as much of the environment of the URC as possible. This will also be the time when we can do some dry runs, some dress rehearsals for individuals. So you have your presentation all ready to go and you want to actually practice it in front of people. These 2 days will also be dedicated to that. So once again, just let me know as you're continuing to put together your presentation, and just say, you know what, I'd like to do a presentation in class April 9th. Can you book me for that time? So just have that on your radar so that we don't have everybody trying to do the 11th because we have enough slots for 5 people on one day, 5 people on the other day. So just let me know if you're interested. All right, so back to the lecture at hand. So today we're going to go through the presentation guidelines. How do you put your presentations together? And this is going to be in general for any presentation. So it'll also work for your poster presentation, but we're going to focus on the URC on these oral presentations. All right, presentation guidelines, number 1. And this is your alpha guideline. This is your top level guideline. This is the guideline that I want you to think of for every single other guideline that I give you. This is the one that rules above them all. And what this guideline is that when you are giving a presentation, you are telling a story. You are telling a story that is true. So we're not making stuff up. This is nonfiction. But you are telling a story and you want it to be a good story. So keep thinking about that when you're doing your presentation. You want your story to be impactful. You want your story to be memorable. You want people to walk out of that presentation thinking, whoa, what a story. That is the goal that you're working for. So keep that in mind. It'll help you make a lot of decisions as you're going through. But basically, remember this. This is the overarching guideline for everything else. All right, guideline number 1. In your entire presentation, you are going to present your introduction, your method, your results, and your discussion. So you are going to present all 4 of those aspects of your research project at some point in your presentation. So bear that in mind. You will be talking about all of these. You are going to be telling your audience a complete story. All right, so that's guideline 1. Guideline 1B. You are only going to be able to present, and your audience is only going to be able to really remember 1 to 2 kind of major ideas. And these are your take-home ideas. So this is an especially important if your findings or your research has multiple findings. So for example, if you have 2 independent variables, you have an interaction, maybe you've taken a look at 2 different dependent variables, maybe you've got a ton of work that you have put into this project, and there are like 7 really interesting things that happened in this project. There's 7 really cool things that you wish you could tell people about. Those 7 things will go into your research paper. Those 7 things will definitely be reported somewhere, and that's why research papers sometimes are 30 pages long, because people have those 7 things that they want to report. This is not a research paper. Your presentation is not a research paper. You got 12 minutes to tell people about something that you found. And if you restrict it to 1 to 2 major ideas, they will understand that and they will be able to take that with them as they go out into the real world. If you present 7 major ideas, they're going to forget all 7. Trust me, I've seen it happen. I've gone to presentations where people are like, and then we did this study over here, and this is what we found, and then we did a second study over here, and this is what we found, and then there was an interaction with these variables, and an interaction over here, but no interaction over here. And I walk out of that presentation, and I turn to my colleague, and I go, well, do you remember anything about that presentation? And they're like, I think there was an interaction somewhere. I can't really remember anything. Too many ideas. It's hard. It's hard when you've done a lot of work, and you have this wonderful, huge result. And you want to present it all. You're like, I want to make sure that everybody hears about this. You can't. So some of you will, it'll be easy to cut down to that 1 to 2 major ideas. For others of you, you might have to ignore part of your results. You might have to ignore, part of your discussion section. That's fine. It's better to have an effective presentation that focuses on one or two major ideas where people walk out of there and go, oh man, I had no idea that, cell phone use leads to increased literacy rates. Wow, what a result. That they will remember if you focus in on what your major results are. All right, so bear that in mind, only 1 to 2 major ideas. Guideline number 2, and this is huge. Start with the phenomenon. So you start with, we're going to skip the typical stuff. You have the title, you'll have your name there, you'll have all that kind of information. When you actually start your presentation, start with a description or an example of the phenomenon that you're looking at. So this is a mistake that a lot of presenters make. They jump right into theory. Your audience is not ready for theory. You know this inside out. Your audience does not know this inside out. So starting with the phenomenon, again, think about a story. This is literally where you go once upon a time. And when you say once upon a time, even if I walk into a movie or I'm opening up a book and I don't know anything about that book, I don't know anything about that movie, as soon as I see that once upon a time, I mentally prepare myself and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm in a fairy tale. And I'm going to see dragons and knights and damsels and princesses and princes and witches and goblins and trolls. I know what I'm in for. You got to do the same thing with your audience. Start with your phenomenon. If your study is about news articles and anxiety, put up a news article and say, when this was reported, how did people react to it? Did it increase their anxiety? Did it decrease their anxiety? Were they worried? Were they not worried? Ooh, what are we going to find? If you're doing your study on, what's another one? Cell phone use and attention span. Put up the phenomenon. Here, cell phones have been spreading through our culture. Everybody owns a cell phone now. What effect is that going to have on our attention? It's going to increase attention. Is it going to decrease attention? Ooh, what's going to happen? Start with the phenomenon. Start with some description of what it is that you'll be looking at. Guideline 2B, once you present the phenomenon, link it to something big. So something big is going to be either a psychological theory or, in a lot of cases, some sort of implication. So if you're talking about cell phones and attention span, and you just introduced the idea that cell phones are everywhere, what effect is this going to have on our attention span? Link it to something big. This is important because attention is used in driving, in education, in interpersonal relationships. So if that is being affected by cell phones, it's going to affect our daily lives. So link it to something big. Let the audience know that, oh, this is important, right? This is the part in the fairy tale where the wise old person tells the young hero that the fate of the entire world rests on them completing that mission. And that brings a massive amount of interest to your story. Could you imagine if Gandalf goes to Frodo and says, you must destroy this ring, otherwise I'm going to be minorly inconvenienced, right? You'd be like, who cares, right? No, big. Link it to something big. What you discovered, what you found has big implications. Link it to that. Tell them this, what we're looking at, has big implications for education, has big implications for racism, has big implications for whatever it is that you're looking at. Link it to something big. And it doesn't even have to be dramatic. Some of you are doing things with, aesthetics, for example. Link it to that, link it to this is going to cast sight on fundamentals idea of what is considered beautiful and what is not considered beautiful. That's important too. It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom, but it has to be something big, something beyond just what you are doing. All right, so you have your introduction, you showed the phenomenon, you linked it to something big, you talked about either the big theories or the big the big implications. You do want to mention one or two theories because you are going to end your introduction with your hypothesis or hypotheses. So you are going to, at some point after you said, this is the phenomenon, and I've linked it here to this big implications. And this theory says that this is how this phenomenon works. But this other theory says that this is how the phenomenon works. And what we've predicted is that if theory number one is true, we are going to find this relationship. If theory number two is true, we're going to find this relationship. You want to end your introduction with the hypotheses, much like your written introduction ended with those hypotheses as well. All right, so those are the first few guidelines. Any questions so far? All right, next guideline. You're eventually going to get to your methods, but never start with the methods. So guideline 2C is that you never want to start your presentation with the methods. And this is highly related to guideline 2D, which is you never ever want to start with your methods. So it is a kind of rookie error. It's a amateur mistake. You can tell when somebody's doing their first presentation. And I've seen this in poster sessions. When I walk up to a poster and I'm like, well, can you tell me about your research? A lot of times people are like, oh, well, we had 12 subjects and we gave them back suppression inventory and then we tested them on these 5 pictures over here. I'm lost. I'm gone. I don't know what is going on. So starting with the methods, I think oftentimes students, people doing their first few presentations might start with the methods because that's probably what you know the best. That's probably the one that you know inside and out because you've made this experiment. It's not anybody else's work. You put it all together. You kind of know all the intricate pieces. You will lose people right off the bat. And the one thing that you don't want to do, like when you're telling a story, you don't want to lose people. You don't want people to check out early on and then later on they're like, oh yeah, you were mentioning something about, something like that. Starting with the methods will do that. So never, ever, ever start with your methods. Big mistake. Make sure you don't do that. Now you will present your methods, but you will present them at the right time. And that right time is right after your introduction with the hypotheses. So right after you say, all right, here's the big phenomenon. Here's the phenomenon. Here's where it links to something huge. Here's theory number one. Theory number one says we should find this. Here's theory number two. Theory number two says we should find this. Those are your hypotheses. Then all of a sudden you say, and here's how we tested it. We had these subjects. They did this survey. They did this other survey. And you communicate your methods. So your methods do come, but only after your audience is on board, only after you've done your introduction. All right, guideline 3B. When you present your methods, do not present any of your standard procedure details. And what I mean by this, and this is again something that people fall for, there is a ton of stuff that you might have done in your methods. There is a ton of intricate little details that you put into your methods. And all of those intricate little details are all things that 99% of your audience does not care to hear about. So I would say present the number of subjects that you have, and then that's about it. If you use randomization to send them to different, independent variables, you do not need to mention the randomization. If you did counterbalancing, you do not need to mention the counterbalancing. If you did Latin square designs, triple crossed intra-compatibility scores, if you did all of those, you don't need to report those. People, when they watch your presentation, they're going to assume that you have done your methods correctly. And anybody who wants to ask you about that, anybody who's really interested about, wait, did you randomize or did you counterbalance, in your procedure? They will ask you at the end of your presentation. So there is room for people to ask you about your methods, but not during your presentation. So for example, you might say something as simple as, we had 20 subjects, and these subjects completed a survey, which they completed this particular survey, which measured their tolerance for different views. And then they completed this second survey, which measured their, their tolerance for pain. Subjects either watched video number 1, which depicted, physical abuse from a woman's perspective, or they watched video number 2, which, depicted physical abuse from a male's perspective. You don't have to then talk about any other standard details. Like the videos were edited so that they were equal lengths. We made sure that the brightness of the videos were the same across both conditions. We made sure that both of them were uploaded to YouTube, so there wasn't any difference there. Nobody in a presentation wants to hear that. And if they do, they'll ask for it later. So think about that. When you're doing your procedure details, think about what's the kind of bare minimum that you need so that they understand what happened. They will not be able to replicate off of your presentation. You just want them to understand this is basically the things that I did to my subjects. This is basically the data that I collected in my corpus analysis. That's what you want in your method section. So do not present randomization details. Do not talk about your flow in your Qualtrics surveys. Do not definitely talk about anything that you did to create those surveys. So don't say anything like, well, as part of our methods, we went to Qualtrics and we had to upload 15 different questions. Those questions needed to have certain logic to them, logic that sent them to different blocks. None of that. Just give them the bare minimum. This is what the subjects did. They experienced this. We manipulated this. We then measured this. And that's about all that you need for your method section. All right. Any questions so far? Okay, good. Guideline number 4. Present your results as simply as possible. Super simply as possible. When I present the results in most of my studies, I might mention what the test was, and I will definitely mention p-values, and that's about it. So you do not have to mention we ran an independent measures 2x2 ANOVA with a independent variable 1 3-level by independent variable 2 4-level analysis with post hoc Bonferroni test. We found that there was a main effect of this. F statistic with this many degrees of freedom is this. P-value is this. I mean, this is critical to your success. And I can tell a lot of eyes just glazed over while you were listening to me talk about that ANOVA. Nobody wants to hear about the intricacies of your statistics. Again, you want it to be a good story. Once again, just try to think about what would happen in an actual story. I don't know why, but I got Lord of the Rings on my mind right now. Imagine Gandalf, gives Frodo the ring. And he's like, this is the ring, the one ring that will rule them all. This is the ring of infinite power. That's all you need to know. If he started telling them, and it was made by elves, and it was smelted with a combination of this metal and this metal. They heated it to a temperature of 4,000 degrees before they then tempered it. And then when they tempered it, they did a quenching. Who cares? We don't need to know that. Somebody might be interested. They're going to be the ones that put up their hand at the end and say, what kind of metal was that? Gandalf, can you tell me about the ring a little bit more? But for most people, they just want to know what the results are. So, as simply as possible. So if you have results and you have stats, you definitely want to mention the results and very little statistics. So you are not justifying your knowledge of stats. So if I had an ANOVA and I was presenting the interaction, okay? You present the interaction, all you need to say is we ran the stats, we ran an ANOVA, and we found that this condition increased as, this condition increased, whereas this second level decreased as this decreased. And I don't even mention a p-value, I just put it up on the graph, and I'm like, If you want to take a look at it, there's your p-value. That's all you need to do. All right, you don't need to justify it. And I understand sometimes students who have just gotten out of doing stats, who have just gotten out of courses where you have to prove that you know stats. Remnants of that might still be there, right? Remnants of that might still be there where you're like, okay, I'm going to present my stats. And just so you know, I did this ANOVA. And it's a 3x2 ANOVA. I know that. And look at my F statistic. It's important. It's not. People don't want to know it. So think about that. Very little statistics. People want that take-home message. This effect is different than this effect. There was an interaction. Keep it very minimum. Tell them the story. Tell them the picture of what's going on. All right, so that's if you have results and you got statistics. You got your results. You had them in enough time. You ran your statistics. Honestly, I think this is just about everybody here. Just in case, if you have results but no statistics, talk about the direction of your results. So even if you don't have stats, even if you can't point to that nice p-value, put up your results and say, you know what, here are the results. And as you can see, the direction of the results indicate that there's a positive correlation here. The difference here indicates that this is, you know, larger than this. So we're not lying. We're not saying, oh, and the p-value is less than 0.05. We're not going to lie about that. We can just say, though, that we haven't run the statistics. However, look at this data over here. What does it mean? So we're not going to misrepresent what we're talking about. But if you haven't run the statistics yet, or sometimes I've seen this in actual professional conferences, maybe you did some analysis, some last minute analysis the morning of your presentation and something just popped up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Put it in there. You can do it. I don't have the stats on this yet, but look at this. Look at this data over here. All right, and I don't think anybody is in this situation, but just in case, if there's a catastrophic failure on your laptop, if you have no results, mention what results were predicted by your theory. So give them a visual and say, if theory number 1 was correct, this is the kind of results we would expect. If theory 2 is correct, this is the kind of results we would expect. And just to show you, if you do this correctly and you do your story correctly, even this, where you have no results, can be impressive. And one of my students, the one that did the study on body image and tactile information, we didn't have results. And she either got the honorable mention for her presentation or won best presentation. So you don't need results for a convincing story, right? Now, thankfully, it's easier with results. You all, I think, have results at this point. So you won't have to do this. But have that in the back of your mind as a sort of confidence builder, how much better it's going to be now that you actually do have results. All right. When presenting the results, only mention the statistics test you used, not why. Again, you don't have to justify it. Imagine that you did everything correctly and nobody's going to question what you did as being correct. That's a good attitude to have when you go in there. So you can say, oh yeah, we ran an ANOVA to test this, but don't be saying things like we ran an ANOVA and it was an independent means ANOVA because we split our groups across 2 separate conditions. So we had 2 independent samples. And they were only measured 1 time. They weren't measured twice, so it's not a dependent measure. Don't give them the reasons why. Just tell them what you did.
Will you ever get asked why you ran a specific test?
You could. You could. It'll come at the end of it. It's very rare, though. It's very rare. In fact, the only times that I ever really see this is in the poster sessions when one of the faculty here comes by and says, just because they teach stats, they're like, hey, why don't you tell me, did any of my teaching stick? Why did you run this particular test? And the reason why you ran a particular test is always the design of your experiment. That's the only reason you ever run a specific test. But the important thing is that, again, it's information that you'll know, but it's not information that you need to present. You know, and it's just always think about that. What does the audience want to hear? What does the audience want? You know, how can I keep that interest of the audience? Because we'll see later on and this is something I think a lot of people forget, scientists, educated people, students who are interested, you're still human beings. And you still operate, your mind operates under human being standards. And you still want to hear a good story. It's kind of like, just again, to help reinforce this in your mind, think about all the people that are wonderful at communicating stories versus people that are horrible at communicating stories, right? Think about that one friend that you have that just tells the best jokes, right? And they'll say things like, all right, two people walk into a bar. One of them is a psychology professor. The other one's a physics professor. And the psychology professor says, and then they bang, 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 hit that punchline. Boom. You're like, oh my gosh, best joke ever. Yep. Think about your horrible joke tellers. Two guys walk into a bar. The bar, it's more like a pub, but we'll call it a bar. So anyway, they walk into a bar. And I guess it's Friday night. Let's just say it's Friday night. Anyway, these two guys walk into a bar, and they open the door, and then they walk, and there's bar stools, so they sit down on the bar stools. And then these two guys, one of them is a professor of psychology, and currently they're an assistant professor, but they're really hoping to get to. No, horrible, right? You're sitting there going, I don't care if this is the funniest joke in the world. My time is wasted and my interest is gone. Think about that as well. So tons of details that you're going to be able to put in, right? Your research paper, if you read your research paper front to back, it's going to take like an hour, right? Maybe like 45 minutes. So you cannot put it all in, so don't even try. So again, when you're presenting your results, think that you're the stats expert, and all you got to tell people is what you did, not why you did it. And if somebody's interested, they'll put up their hand and they'll say, hey, you ran a linear regression. Why did you choose that one? And then you'll tell them, I ran a linear regression because I had two variables. I couldn't run a correlation. Boom, boom. But that's your question period stuff. All right. When you're presenting the results, the less statistics you mention, the better your results are communicated. So you do need some statistics, right? Some statistics help, especially that p-value. When they see that p-value and they see that it's less than 0.05, people that are in the know, they understand. They're like, ooh, wow, p-value, right? So you do want to present some statistics, but the less you mention, the better. So you take a look at your results section. The amount of numbers you have in your results section, you're probably going to cut that by like 5, right? So you're not going to report every single mean. You're not going to report your actual F statistics. You're not going to report your degrees of freedom. You're not going to report, if you do a regression, your coefficients, your p-values for each coefficient. You're not going to do that. The less numbers you can throw at somebody, the more they're going to understand what it is that you're trying to tell them. So remember that. The less statistics you mention, the better. You do want to throw in a little bit, like I said, that p-value. Just in case they're wondering, does this person actually do any statistics? You can be like, bam, p-value right there. But you don't have to mention your entire statistics section because that's in your research paper. If they are interested, you can give them a copy of your research paper. All right, so we mentioned the results. Less statistics, the better. Guideline number 5. When you're presenting your discussion, present the conclusions. Spell this out for your audience. Tell them, our results supported hypothesis number 1. We actually did find that the higher this variable was, the lower this variable was. So spell it out for them. Give them that nice synopsis where you kind of tie it all up for them in a nice little bow. So when you get to your discussion, present your conclusions. Tell them what your results actually mean. And again, you might have not presented all your results. You might not be able to present all your conclusions. For example, I'll give you the most straightforward example for not presenting all your results. If you have a main effect and you have a second main effect and you have an interaction, a significant interaction, your story is in the interaction. And all you need to do is present that interaction because your entire story is in the interaction. In your research paper, you have to go through evidence of a main effect of this, evidence of the main effect of that. But in your presentation, go straight to the interaction. Just present, because that's your main point. Present your conclusions. What do your results mean? Tie them back into your hypotheses. And then present your implications and your applications. And feel free to be bold on these, right? So if your implication or application is that the United States of America should completely overhaul their educational system because of my one semester of work, say that. If that's what it means, say that. An implication is that we shouldn't be doing this the way that we're doing. An implication is that smartphones are not the horrible cognitive abilities destroyers that people think they are. They're actually helping people develop their cognitive abilities, right? Implications. Years ago, there seemed to be a huge divide in how different political ideologies use their language. Now that divide is gone. What does that mean, right? Are we now thinking more alike? Is there really no difference between both sides anymore? It's just in the way that they think. Present those implications, make them big, make them bold, and and give them to your audience. Any questions on this? All right. So one thing that I'll mention, because now we kind of gotten to the end. So the only thing you do after this is always nice to end with a slide. Sometimes literally it just says questions, a little question mark. And then that lets them know that my presentation is done. It's now time to ask questions. And it invites questions and it invites comments. So that's always a nice thing to have. In your presentation, one thing that I want everybody to think of is I want you to think of and go in with the idea that your research that you have worked hard on this semester is the greatest research in the history of psychology, and I want you to present it that way. Because too often I have seen students with great projects undercut themselves by some sort of unwillingness to kind of stand bold behind their presentations. So I have seen students get to their results, and their results are amazing, and the results are so cool, and the first word out of their mouths is, well, we ran 20 subjects. I wish we could have run more. It would have been better if we had more subjects, but unfortunately, we started early enough, but we only got 20, and then I had 40, but half of them didn't complete the survey, so they had to be excluded. Anyways, we only have 20. If you start like that, I don't care what your results are. You only had 20. Why would I care? So don't undercut yourself at any point in your study. Could your study have been better? Yeah, every study could be better. All of my studies could be better. Has your study answered your question definitely? No. No study ever answers a question definitely. So don't even think that you need to do that. But psychologically, people change when you cut yourself down that way. So if you say something like in your conclusions, everybody knows your results don't prove anything for certain, right? But if you present your conclusions and you say something like, well, our results, they don't show this for sure, right? They're not really, they don't prove anything, but they indicate that, maybe this is the case. I'm already out. I'm gone. Present it as if, our results indicate, our results show. You don't want to lie. You don't want to say, hey, our results prove. We're done. Psychology is finished. No, but don't add that little extra bit where you're undercutting yourself, right? And just to give you the closest analogy I can think to this, being bold, standing behind your presentation. Two ones. Number one, think of that detective in that final reveal, that final scene where they're pointing out who the suspect is. And they are like, we found this, and this clue indicates this. We found this, and this clue indicates this. Therefore, the murderer is Mr. Smythe. he murdered, the Countess of Dufresne. They never ever are timid. They're never ever like, well, we kind of found this dust over here, and I think it was cigar ash, but it could have been something else, but it kind of looks like cigar ash, so maybe let's just go with that. And this, maybe it's over here. So I could be wrong, but I'm thinking maybe it's Mr. Smythe. That's my best guess. I wish I had more clues. I wish I had more time to analyze this, but it's kind of like that. Which one? Ask yourself, which one is more convincing? Which one would you leave that room saying, I feel good that I went to that? It's the one that's bold. The other thing to remember when you're undercutting yourself, if you have ever tried to introduce yourself at a party, introduce yourself to a stranger in a new social situation, undercutting yourself is the equivalent of going up to them and saying, I'm not a psychopath murderer, just so you know. Now, my name is so-and-so. I'm a student at IUSB. You're done, right? You're done because immediately they have it in their mind, psychopath murderer. Only a psychopath murderer would tell me right off the bat that they're not a psychopath murderer. When you say things like, well, I wish we could have had more subjects, right? When you say things like, well, not every subject completed my study. When you say things like, well, I wish my operational definition, I wish we had access to this survey instead of this survey. As soon as you say that, you're telling people, well, I'm not a psycho murderer, but, here's my results. So don't do that to yourself. Be bold. I don't want to hear anybody saying anything bad about their own study. And people might say, people at the end, they'll say, oh, are there alternative explanations? They say, yeah, there's alternative explanations. Here's the alternative explanations, but don't undercut yourself. Make sure that you're not doing that. And when you go through your practice sessions, look for those examples, and catch yourself if you do actually do that. Is there a question?
Yeah. Are there any common questions, just in general, that we might be asked?
Mm-hmm.
What are they?
We will get to those. We will get to those.
Okay.
We're going to have an entire class devoted to questions and how to deal with questions. But you're absolutely sure there are some common questions. Usually they're going to be, I'll give you the two broad categories that you'll come up with. Usually they're going to be about your methods. People will ask things like, oh, well, how many questions were there in your survey? Or in your case, how long did you train, your dog for? Something like that. Those are oftentimes the ones that come up. The other big category is speculation questions. So sometimes people will say things like, oh, well, you mentioned that cell phone use, actually increases cognitive abilities. Do you think this is something that would be true for young individuals as well? So should I give my 3-year-old, a smartphone so they can use it? That's a speculation question. And basically those ones I really like because they're saying, hey, you're the expert. What about this situation? Let me ask you about this situation. So those are basically the two that you'll get. You'll get kind of a lot of methodological questions sometimes. You'll get some speculation questions at another time. And then you might get anything and everything in between. But we will definitely go through how to answer and address and identify those different questions so that you can stand up there and be ready for any question that comes your way.
Okay, so let's say you have a lot of questions, because you only have 3 minutes to respond, correct?
Yep.
So let's say you have a lot of questions to the point where you might not necessarily have time to respond to all of them.
Yep.
Is there a way that you choose? Is it just
so you can choose your questions. So when you're doing your presentation, either you'll choose your questions or it's equally often done that the moderator who's there will choose your question. So you will have, during your presentation, you'll have somebody sitting separately. They're the moderator. And they're the ones that kind of tell you, okay, you got 12 minutes for your presentation. When you got about 5 minutes left, I will hold up, I make myself these little printed cards that I hold up that literally says 5 minutes. So people can know that they're running out of time, 2 minutes, and then I give them the 1 minute. And then a good moderator will cut you off at the 12-minute stage if that's what they decided on. And then they'll say something like, we need to wrap this up. they'll definitely not let you go over your 15-minute allotted time. So, you wrap it up, and then the moderator will be like, are there any questions? Hands will go up. Either you or the moderator can be like, okay, yes, I'll take your question. Yes, I'll take your question. And then at some point, a good moderator will say, all right, we got time for one more question. One more is a quick question. All right, let's do it. And they will shut it down. What happens is that if you still had like 20 people with their hands up, they'll come to you after the talk. They'll come to you in a professional conference. They'll come to you and say, hey, can we go grab some coffee? I want to ask you some more stuff about your presentation. And then those are often like really good, more in-depth conversations. But the moderators will help you along in that situation, especially with the cutting it off. Moderators are mostly there to keep this on time, because I've been at conferences with bad moderators, and this moderator allowed their presentations to go over time. And when they finally got to the last couple of presentations, they asked these presenters, they were like, I know we were originally going to give you 20 minutes, but there's only 10 minutes left in the session. Can you do it in 10 minutes? And the person was like, no, we cannot do ours in 10 minutes. We were promised 20 minutes. We need 20 minutes. And then the moderator's like, okay, well, the next session is supposed to start in 10 minutes. Do you guys mind if we, use 10 minutes of your time? And the next session who was there, they're like, no, we start at 2 o'clock. And this moderator lost control of the situation. And there was actual like arguments and people going, we were promised 20 minutes. And if we were promised, you should have cut them off earlier at the beginning. That person over there took 45 minutes for their presentation. Why weren't they limited to 20 minutes? And the other people were like, we have to present at 1 because it gets ugly sometimes. It's the job of the moderator, though, to say, all right, your 15 minutes is up at that point. Incidentally, and this is just a little aside, this is a strategy that you can use if you are, after I get you ready to answer questions, if you are still absolutely, completely uncomfortable answering questions, which you won't be, but let's just say your doomsday scenario device, you can always, and this is not exactly the most, I'm going to be posting this on YouTube. I don't endorse this strategy, but I'll let you know what it is. You can always do your presentation the full amount of time, at which point you will not have time for questions. So if you are given 15 minutes and you run your presentation the full 15, a good moderator will look at their time and say, unfortunately, we don't have time for any questions. Thank you very much. On to the next presenter. So again, if you're going in there and after all the work that we're going to be doing in the future lectures, you are still like, oh my gosh, I can't handle questions. I can't handle questions. Do a 15-minute presentation, run your time out, and then the moderator will be like, unfortunately, we don't have time for any questions. And then practice in the mirror your sad look where you're like, oh, really? Like, oh man, I was going to answer so many questions. But that's like your nuclear option, right? That's like your doomsday option. None of you will need to do that. I will get you ready for questions and comments. All right. So moving on. As I mentioned, Alpha Guideline, you are telling a story. That is, again, everything that you're going to make a decision about stems from this idea. You're telling a story. You got 12 minutes to communicate this wonderful story that you're doing. So anything that you put in to your presentation, ask yourself, for those 1 to 2 main points, is this communicating or helping me communicate those 1 to 2 main points? And then make that decision. Does it stay in or does it come out? Think about that you're telling a story. The corollary to this, Alpha Guideline point 1, is that you're telling a story to human beings. And it always amazes me how many people at all levels tend to forget that the scientists, the students, the professionals in the audience are regular individuals who do not have super cognitive abilities. And I'll show you what I mean. So I went to a conference that was on empirical aesthetics. So literally psychology of art, the experimental and data collection understanding of art. So these were people that researched art. These were people that presented on art, did their studies on art, knew about art, and yet when you took a look at their presentations, some of them were just horribly made. And you look at them and you're like, have you even ever seen art? That's what you would put up on the slide. And they forget that these are human beings. So this was part of the Q&A session, and I want you to listen to what the first individual said for the panel that I organized for this session. This was the Q&A. Listen to what they said.
Yes. So first of all, I want to congratulate all three of you for having among the most beautiful and attractive slides to show. So it's nice having people think about visual design. So my question.
All right. It's nice to have individuals that think about visual design. It's nice to have individuals that make these beautiful slides. Why? Because we're all humans. We like looking at beautiful things. So don't for a second think that the way that your presentation looks is not going to impact how much your presentation communication is effective. It matters. So make sure that your presentation is designed, is made so that it looks good, it flows good. Make sure that it's designed for human beings, because as much as you have a certain level of intelligence in the room, it doesn't matter if you're a PhD, it doesn't matter if you're an introductory student, it doesn't matter where you are. We're not robots, right? We are human beings as well. So think about that when you're designing your presentation. So other things to think about. How do we make sure that, again, we have this presentation that human beings themselves are going to understand and appreciate? Well, there's a few things we can do. Number one, or guideline number 7, when you're explaining things, use graphs, use figures, use pictures whenever possible. So one of the things about a presentation is because it's not an actual publication, it's not going to be in a journal that is being sold for money. Because of that, copyright restrictions on the images that you can use are much less in a presentation or a poster than it is in a publication. So whereas in the journal that I publish, I need to have photos that you own the copyright to, or is part of that Wiki Commons Creative Commons licensees. For a presentation, you can use copyright images. Use that to your advantage. So for example, if I was talking about depression and I wanted to define depression for my audience, I could throw up a slide like this and say, depression, a mental disorder characterized by episodes of all-encompassing low mood accompanied by low self-esteem and loss of interest or pleasure in normally enjoyable activities. Number one, this slide, visually unappealing, right? You have a presentation. You have this wonderful presentation software. Use it. Instead of throwing words up, throw up an image and then talk about it. Depression is a psychological disorder characterized by low mood and low self-esteem. You can have notes out in front of you, right, where you can actually read off the definition if you need to. But this is way more visual appealing, and it helps you understand depression. Oh, okay, yeah, low mood, sad mood. I get it, and it makes that better story. So use your figures as much as possible. If you have an image, if you have a lot of text, ask yourself, do I need this text up there? Or would an image, serve that purpose as well? You want to make your graphs, your figures, and your pictures as big as possible. So oftentimes I get a little bit frustrated when I see people do this. Or even worse, it'll be an even smaller little image. You have, again, this wonderful space that you can use to make these wonderful, memorable images. So do it, right? Write this out as notes somewhere that you have access to, and then show them. Nice, big, full-figured image. Do that instead. So always look for ways of making your images bigger. So if you throw up a graph and you got your presentation title up there at the top, Ask yourself, do I really need my presentation title still up there? Or can I take this opportunity to make that image a little bit bigger, make it a little bit more understandable to the people in the back row, right? And then if you have images like this and you're trying to make them big and then you find that you have cut off certain things on your template, that just makes it look a little, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't like that. I find that looks a little amateurish. I find that looks a little amateurish. So what I'll oftentimes do is I'll just put a white background on there. Gets rid of all those little artifacts. Just makes it look a little bit more visually pleasing. So again, make your images as big as you possibly can. When you throw up that graph of your results, make it big. Make it fill up as much of that slide as possible. It's just a more enjoyable, more memorable way of presenting information. All right, make sure that your graphs, you got a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there any like section or any point in time where we should avoid using photos or no?
No. So there is, I would say that unless your audience needs to memorize something word for word, or unless the words are part of your demonstration, you don't need the words up there. So for example, if I was doing a presentation on memory and I wanted to say, oh yeah, I presented them with a list of 16 words. Why don't we try it right now? I'll give you 30 seconds to try to memorize these words. That's the only time that I would say, words need to be there. Now sometimes you do want them to be there, right? You do want them because they will grab attention. People will automatically read. Remember that. People will automatically read your slides. So, but I find oftentimes that presentations are too wordy. When a nice image will do the exact same thing, it'll convey the exact same information, and you don't need all those words. All right, make sure that you graph your figures and your pictures, illustrate your point. So for example, if you have a graph that looks like this, and your main point that you are trying to communicate is that there was a significant difference between reaction times for associated words and unassociated words. This might be the graph that you found in Excel when you analyzed your data. This does not illustrate that point. If I found a main effect or a difference, a significant difference between unassociated and associated words, this does not look like a significant effect. This looks more like a significant effect. So I'm not lying, right? I just changed the axes here so that the difference that is true becomes a visual difference, right? So when I say, oh yeah, there was a significant difference between associated words and unassociated words, people looking at the picture will say, oh yeah, I can see it. There's that difference. There's that significant difference here. So make sure that your pictures tell your story. And this is another good example of if I'm not presenting this information, it shouldn't even be up there. So if you have information up on the screen, your audience will read it, and your audience will wonder, when are you going to get to that information, right? If they see it, they're going to think you're eventually going to get to it. It's kind of like, once again, bringing it back to stories. If you ever see a movie trailer that has a super cool scene, you then start watching the movie and you can't help but in your mind wonder, when am I going to see that scene? And I went through Wreck-It Ralph 2. I went the whole way and I was like, where is that bunny kitty cat scene with the milkshakes and the pancakes? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. The whole time I was watching it and I got angry at the movie because I was like, it wasn't in the movie. And then it was in the post-credit scene, and I was like, "This is genius! They pulled a fast one on me." But the point is, I was wondering the whole time, when were they going to get to it? If you have this figure up there, when you're explaining this, people are not going to be listening to you. They're going to be wondering the whole time, when are they going to get to word, non-word? When are they going to get to non-word, then word? And if you don't get to that, they'll be angry. They'll wonder, like, why was that up in the first place? Why did I spend all my time reading that? So again, Think about what tells your story. Use that as your guide. All right, other things. Use as little text as possible. So take the text that you are putting on your screen and ask yourself, does it serve that purpose of telling the story? Do I need that text? And definitely, never have a slide that looks like this. So if I'm going to talk about depression and then subtypes of depression, and I put up that slide, my audience is gone. Either they're going to look at that slide and go, oh, no, here we go. Or what they're going to do is I'm going to be standing there going, depression. Depression is, I'm going to do two things. Number one, you're going to read from your slide. The more you put text on your slide, the more likely that you're going to read from your slide. And that is not a good look, right? That's just not something people came there to do. So one, you're going to want to read from your slide. Depression, a mental disorder characterized by episodes of an all-encompassing low mood accompanied by lowest self-esteem and a loss of interest or pleasure in normally enjoyable activities. While I was reading that, most of you were probably going subtypes. Melancholic depression is characterized by a loss of pleasure. Atypical depression is characterized by mood reactivity. Catatonic depression is rare and severe form of major depression. You can't stop yourself from reading. Your audience cannot stop themselves from reading. So don't give them something to read if you want them to pay attention to you. So rather than doing this, think about nice image. Depression, low, self-esteem, low mood, characterized by this, and this. And then if you do want to use text, and you can say things like, all right, we're going to talk about subtypes of depression. Melancholic depression. Melancholic depression is when this occurs and this occurs. Atypical depression. Atypical depression is when this occurs and this occurs. Even better than this would be to do something like this, where you don't allow them to read ahead. So as long as you're talking about melancholic depression, that is on the screen. And they can read it, melancholic depression. And then once they're done reading, they have no choice but to listen to you talk about melancholic depression, which is exactly what you want. And then you can say, another type, atypical depression. Atypical depression is when this occurs and this occurs. And notice, they got nothing to read. All eyes are going to be on you. All focus is on you. And you can just go through catatonic depression. And then we have postpartum depression. There's also seasonal affective disorder. So think about presenting that information. And this leads into the next point here. When you do have text, introduce your text line by line, idea by idea. So when you present anything on the screen, just be very aware that as soon as you got words up there, people are reading. And if they're reading, they're not paying attention to you. All right? Many times when people come into my office, or if I'm engaging in conversation with somebody and I got my phone and I was checking my emails or doing whatever, and somebody comes up to me and says, oh, can I talk to you for a minute? I'll say, yeah, absolutely. Take the phone. I put it down, face down, because I know we are programmed to read. And if anything pops up on my phone, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, what was that? Hamilton Traditional School. And then all of a sudden you realize you haven't been paying attention to anything that person has been saying. And in a conversation, you can either try to claw your way back into that conversation by pretending like, yeah, I totally agree with whatever you've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. Or you can just tell them, dude, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Can you just repeat that? I kind of spaced out. You can't do that in a presentation. Nobody's going to put up their hand and say, listen, I'm really sorry. I was reading your slide. Can you explain melancholic depression one more time? Because I wasn't paying attention. Nobody's going to do that. What they will do is they will, in their mind, make the decision that, you know what, I'm lost and I'm just going to kind of zone out right now. And they're gone. They're out of your presentation. Don't let them do that. Rather than introducing it all the way like this, introduce it like this. Subtypes of depression. First one, melancholic depression. Here's all the important information I want you to listen to me about melancholic depression. And then atypical depression. Let me tell you about atypical depression. I'm going to flip my phone right now. Let me tell you about atypical depression and the things about it. Catatonic depression, postpartum, seasonal affective disorder. There's no limit to how many slides you can have. You can go through them really quickly just to introduce these ideas, idea by idea. And remember, they will read. Your audience will read ahead and not listen to you and get lost. And once they're lost, it's hard for them to get back into your presentation. All right, guideline number 9. You want to use a simple PowerPoint template. So typically I use a template that looks kind of like this. I have actually uploaded the template that I use in Canvas. It's in your URC resources, I believe, folder. You feel free to use that template. It has, it's got the little IUSB and Flat Insane Research logos there. But the big thing about it is a high contrast, easy to read template. Because when you go to any any conference to do a presentation, oftentimes you do not know what your presentation environment is going to be like. So this is a safe presentation template for any environment. So I don't know if there's going to be bright lights on my screen when I go to my presentation. And if you choose another template, it might not show up as well. It might not be easy to read. And again, if your template is not easy to read, nobody's going to tune in on your story. All right, so think about how frustrating it is when you're talking to somebody and they're a low talker and they're like, okay, and like, 2 people walk into a bar and one was a psychologist. And you're like, I'm sorry, what was that? 2 people walk into a bar and one was a psychologist. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. 2 people walk into a bar. You get frustrated, right? Same thing with this. If you have a template and it's difficult to see, especially if you pop up results and people are looking at your results and your oranges might not look orange, your yellows might look the same as other yellows and it's difficult to see, it gets frustrating. They tune out. They don't want a part of it. So I would highly recommend either use the template that I uploaded to Canvas or choose another one that has a high contrast to it. And be very conscious of your choices. Test your graphs, test your images, see how they look in your presentation. Make sure that it's extremely visible. It's very clear what everything is. All right, I think we got a few more things. When you're using your PowerPoint, one way to introduce idea by idea by idea, one way to introduce your graphs, idea by idea by idea, is to use PowerPoint animations. So be very careful with those, especially if you haven't done many PowerPoint animations before. Sometimes you get carried away with the bells and whistles of it all your first time, and you end up with something that looks like this, where you're like, all right, we're talking about subtypes of depression. There's melancholic depression. There's atypical. Oh, no, this is a good one. Sorry. This is a good one. You want something like this. You want like dissolve in, fade in, white. Those are the good ones to use. What you don't want is you don't want anything like this. Subtypes of depression. We got melancholic depression. We got atypical depression. There's catatonic depression. Postpartum depression. And then we got, we just wait on this. There's seasonal affective. Don't get carried away with it. Because number one, it might take a while. We're still waiting for seasonal affective disorder. Number two, it's distracting. They should be concentrating up here, not looking at, the cool little, falling in of things. So be aware of that. Use your animations to introduce point by point. That's the biggest thing that I use my animations for. But don't get carried away. And definitely test it. Because you don't want to find out that it's going to take you 60 seconds for a seasonal affectation disorder to pop up during your presentation. And this is, again, why practice before, dry runs before are so effective. Because if you were doing a dry run of this, you would be like, oh, man, That's too long. I'm going to change that animation. All right, so again, remember, you're telling a story. You're telling this story to human beings. So think about what's going to be most effective. Think about what's going to be most pleasing to the eye. Because I know all of you, you got the science of it down. You got the research of it down. For the presentation, you want to make sure that you got the communication of it down. So your message is good. Make sure the communication of your message is as effective as possible. All right, so that is it for today. Next time, we're going to continue with the conference presentation how-tos. We're going to continue also with or introduce how to deal with questions. So start kind of collecting ideas, putting your presentations together, and remember the guidelines here, and let's make for some highly effective presentations. Other than that, we are done for the day.